Please don't go to the parking garage tonight. 8-year-old Ella Brooks grabbed the sleeve of billionaire Edward Wood's suit. The crowded hotel lobby fell strangely quiet. Edward stopped. The scent of polished wood and fresh coffee hung in the air. Sunlight spilled across the marble floor. Business leaders, hotel guests, and employees turned to stare at the little girl standing beside one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Ella swallowed hard. "I heard them talking," she said. "A man in a gray suit told someone you're supposed to die tonight." A few people laughed, others frowned. Across the lobby, Richard Collins froze for half a second before forcing a smile. Edward looked into Ella's eyes. She wasn't joking. She wasn't asking for anything. She looked terrified. "Who did you hear?" Edward asked quietly. Ella slowly raised her finger and pointed into the crowd. "Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. It's always incredible to see viewers from all around the world coming together for stories like this. And if you enjoy powerful stories about courage, kindness, and justice, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next chapter." The finger never finished pointing. A hotel manager quickly stepped between Ella and the crowd. "That's enough," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Come on, sweetheart, let's find your mother." The moment broke apart. Conversations restarted. Shoes clicked across marble floors. Someone laughed nervously. But Edward Wood remained standing where he was. His eyes stayed on the little girl as she was guided away. She didn't look relieved. She looked frustrated, as if she knew nobody had truly listened. 3 hours earlier, Ella Brooks had been sitting in the passenger seat of her mother's aging delivery van. The heater rattled loudly. Cold March air pressed against the windows. Beside her, Monica Brooks drove through downtown Chicago while the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the vehicle. Their small bakery operated out of a rented commercial kitchen on the south side. Business wasn't bad, but it wasn't easy either. Every order mattered. Every customer mattered, especially a customer like Wood Grand Hotel. "Don't forget your sketchbook," Monica said as they stopped at a red light. Ella held it up. "I got it. You drew half the city already." Ella smiled. "I still need the river." Monica laughed softly. Those moments were her favorite, just the two of them. No bills, no worries, just conversation. The hotel appeared ahead like a giant glass palace. Sunlight reflected from hundreds of windows. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Men in dark suits moved quickly through revolving doors. Ella always felt like she had entered another world whenever they came here. Their van rolled toward the loading area behind the building. The contrast was impossible to miss. In front, expensive cars. In back, delivery trucks. In front, marble floors. In back, concrete stained by years of work. Monica parked. "You stay close today." "I will. You said that last time." "I mean it this time." Monica raised an eyebrow. Ella grinned. 5 minutes later, they entered through the service entrance. The smell changed immediately. Fresh bread mixed with industrial cleaner. Metal carts rattled across tile floors. Kitchen staff hurried between stations. Phones rang, orders were shouted. Everything moved fast. Monica signed paperwork while Ella sat on a bench near the hallway. She opened her sketchbook. For a few minutes, she drew the huge steel shelves nearby. Then she heard voices. At first, she ignored them. Adults talked all the time, but something in one voice made her look up. A man stood around the corner. Gray suit, expensive watch, perfect hair. Ella had seen him before. He worked here. Everyone seemed nervous around him. The man spoke quietly into his phone. "Everything happens tonight." Ella froze. The words drifted down the hallway. "The audit starts tomorrow." Silence. Then, "No mistakes." More silence. Ella slowly closed her sketchbook. She wasn't trying to spy, she simply listened. The garage is the best place. A pause. After that, nobody asked questions. Ella's stomach tightened. The hallway suddenly felt colder. The man turned slightly. Ella quickly looked down. Her pencil moved across blank paper. She pretended to draw. The voice continued. I'll transfer the rest when it's finished. Finished what? She wasn't sure, but she didn't like the sound of it. Not at all. A second voice suddenly answered, not from the phone. Someone had walked into the hallway. Ella carefully glanced up. Another man stood there, tall, broad shoulders, blue maintenance uniform. A badge hung from his pocket. The two men exchanged looks. The man in the gray suit pulled a thick envelope from inside his jacket. Ella could see the edge of cash. The maintenance worker accepted it quickly. Neither man smiled. Neither looked comfortable. The envelope disappeared into the worker's pocket. Then they walked away in opposite directions. Ella sat completely still. The air smelled faintly of grease and fresh coffee. Far away, she heard dishes crashing in the kitchen, but her attention remained fixed on that hallway. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Sweetheart? Monica's voice startled her. Ella jumped. What happened? Nothing? Monica studied her face. You don't look like nothing. Ella hesitated. Then she told her everything. The phone call, the envelope, the garage, the strange feeling in her stomach. Monica listened patiently. When Ella finished, she sighed. Honey, adults talk about business all the time. It didn't sound like business. People move money around. He said nobody would ask questions. Monica's expression softened. Ella, I'm serious. I know you are. Monica crouched beside her. The fluorescent lights reflected in her tired eyes. Sometimes we hear pieces of conversations and misunderstand them. Ella looked at the floor. Maybe that was true, but the feeling wouldn't go away, not even a little. A few minutes later, they headed toward the lobby to finish paperwork. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The service corridors disappeared. Luxury took their place. Warm lighting, fresh flowers, soft piano music. Everything gleamed. Guests carried designer bags. Employees smiled constantly. Ella walked quietly beside her mother. Then movement near the entrance caught her eye. Several security guards appeared. People straightened their posture. Employees whispered. A black SUV had arrived, someone important. Very important. The revolving doors opened. Edward Wood entered. Ella recognized him instantly. She had seen his face in newspapers, on television, on magazine covers, one of the richest men in America. He moved through the lobby surrounded by executives. Yet something about him felt lonely. Nobody spoke casually around him. Nobody laughed. Everyone seemed careful, as if one wrong word could cost them something. Edward nodded to employees as he walked. Professional, polite, distant. Then Ella saw another familiar face. The man in the gray suit, standing near the elevators. Richard Collins, watching Edward. Smiling. The same smile from the hallway, the same smile from the envelope exchange. For the first time, Ella felt truly afraid. The pieces suddenly connected inside her head. Garage. Tonight, no mistakes. Transfer the rest when it's finished. Her heart pounded. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she wasn't. But if she stayed quiet and something happened, the thought made her chest tighten. Edward continued toward the elevators. The distance between them grew, 10 feet, 15, 20. Ella looked at her mother. Monica was signing paperwork, distracted, no time, no explanation, just a choice. Ella dropped her sketchbook. Then she ran, straight across the lobby, toward Edward Wood. Ella's sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor as she ran. "Ella!" Monica's voice echoed across the lobby. Too late. Ella slipped through a gap between two businessmen and reached Edward Wood just as he approached the elevators. That was when she grabbed his sleeve. That was when she delivered the warning. And that was when the entire afternoon changed. Now the lobby buzzed with whispers. Guests pretended not to stare. Employees exchanged uneasy glances. The soft piano music continued playing near the restaurant entrance, but it felt distant, muted, as if everyone was listening for what would happen next. Edward studied Ella's face. Children lied sometimes. Children imagined things. But they usually looked away when adults challenged them. Ella didn't. She stood still beneath the golden light pouring through the glass walls, waiting. Richard Collins walked forward. Smooth, calm, professional, the same way he always moved through the hotel. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he said with a friendly smile. His voice carried easily. Several executives immediately relaxed. A misunderstanding sounded harmless. A murder plan did not. Richard looked down at Ella. "Sweetheart, maybe you heard something and got confused." Ella felt her stomach twist. The words sounded kind, but they didn't feel kind. They said someone would die. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Richard chuckled softly. "See, that's exactly what I mean. Adults sometimes use dramatic language during business conversations." Edward said nothing. His eyes moved from Richard to Ella, then back again. Monica finally reached them, breathing hard. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wood." She gently touched Ella's shoulder. "Come on, honey." "But Mom, we're leaving." "I heard them." "I know." Monica lowered her voice. "We're leaving." The embarrassment burned across her face. This hotel account mattered. One complaint could cost them months of income. She couldn't risk it. Not over something she wasn't even sure had happened. Ella looked down. The marble floor reflected the lights above. Tiny golden circles danced near her shoes. Nobody believed her, not really. "Wait." The word came from Edward. Everyone stopped, including Richard. Edward crouched slightly so he could meet Ella at eye level. The movement surprised several people nearby. Powerful men rarely lowered themselves for anyone, especially not for children. "What exactly did you hear?" The lobby grew quiet again. Ella swallowed. The man in the gray suit was talking. Richard's smile froze for half a second. "He said tonight." Ella continued. "He said the garage was the best place." Nobody interrupted. "He said there couldn't be any mistakes." Monica closed her eyes briefly. This was getting worse, not better. "And then," Edward asked, "he gave an envelope to another man." Richard laughed, not loudly, just enough. "Mr. Wood, I hand out vendor payments constantly." A few executives nodded. Reasonable, logical, normal. Richard turned toward Ella. "You probably saw me paying a contractor." Ella stared at him. The same feeling returned. The cold feeling from the hallway, the feeling that something was wrong. She couldn't explain it. She just knew. "I don't think that's what it was." A few people smiled at the innocence of the statement. Richard smiled too, but his eyes didn't. "Well," he said, "fortunately, business isn't decided by feelings." The words hung in the air. Edward noticed something. Not the words. The reaction. Ella looked hurt. Not because Richard disagreed, because he dismissed her. There was a difference. A small one. But Edward saw it. He had spent decades reading people, investors, politicians, competitors, liars. Truth often appeared in the smallest moments. A twitch, a glance, a pause. Ella wasn't performing. She genuinely believed what she was saying. The question was whether she was correct. Daniel Harris arrived from the security desk, tall, broad shoulders, calm expression. "Everything okay here?" Richard answered before anyone else. A child misunderstood a conversation. Daniel looked relieved. Good, simple, easy. He preferred easy. Edward stood. "Daniel." "Sir, did anyone report suspicious activity today?" Daniel shook his head. "No, sir." Richard immediately nodded. "There you go." Case closed, at least for everyone except Ella. She looked around the lobby, the giant chandeliers, the expensive artwork, the people in tailored suits. Nobody seemed worried. Nobody seemed interested. She felt small, smaller than ever, a child from the South Side, a delivery worker's daughter, standing among people who owned buildings worth more than she could imagine. Maybe they would never listen. Maybe they couldn't. Then she noticed something. Across the lobby, near the elevators, a maintenance cart, and beside it, the same man. The man who received the envelope. Jason Reed. Blue maintenance uniform. Looking toward the group. The second his eyes met hers, he looked away. Then he pushed the cart toward a side hallway. Fast, too fast. Ella pointed. "That's him." Heads turned. Jason disappeared around the corner. Daniel frowned. "Who?" "The man from before." Daniel looked toward the empty hallway. Nothing there. Richard spread his hands. "This is getting ridiculous." Monica squeezed Ella's shoulder. People were staring now, more than before. Ella could feel it. Some looked annoyed, some looked amused. One woman whispered something to her husband. Both smiled. The humiliation settled heavily in Monica's chest. She wanted to leave, immediately. But Edward wasn't finished. Something bothered him. Not the story itself. The consistency. Ella wasn't changing details. Children who invented stories usually added things as they went. Ella repeated the same facts every time. Tonight. Garage. No mistakes, envelope. The details never shifted. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. His younger brother, 20 years earlier, a summer afternoon. A fishing dock near Lake Michigan. His brother laughing. His brother saying, "Most people only listen to important voices." Edward had laughed back then. His brother hadn't. "The problem is," his brother had said, "important voices aren't always the honest ones." The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Edward blinked. For a moment he almost heard his brother's voice again. Then Richard stepped closer. "Sir, we have the investor meeting in 30 minutes. Business, schedules, numbers, normal life. The world, Edward understood. Yet he found himself looking at Ella again. The little girl held a sketchbook against her chest. Its corners were worn. Several pages stuck out unevenly. She looked nervous, but she hadn't backed down once, not once. Edward made a decision. Small, simple, but important. "Cancel nothing," he said. Richard relaxed slightly. Then Edward continued, "But I want Sarah Bennett brought in." Richard's expression changed. Only for an instant. Almost invisible. Sarah Bennett was Edward's chief attorney. She asked uncomfortable questions. "Sir," Richard said carefully, "that seems unnecessary." "Maybe." Edward buttoned his jacket. "Maybe not." Silence followed. Daniel shifted his weight. Monica looked confused. Ella simply watched. Edward turned toward her. "When Sarah arrives, I want you to tell her everything you told me." Richard's jaw tightened. Just briefly. Then the smile returned. Professional, polished, controlled. "Of course," he said. But inside something had begun to move, something dangerous. Because for the first time that day, a little girl nobody noticed had managed to slow down a plan that had taken months to build. And Richard Collins suddenly realized that. Across the lobby, Jason Reed reappeared near a service corridor. He met Richard's eyes, only for a second, but it was enough. Richard gave the smallest shake of his head, a warning, a change, a problem. And Ella saw the entire exchange. The air in the lobby felt heavier now. Not because anything had changed, but because something had started. Edward Wood stood near the elevators, one hand resting lightly on his cuff. Calm on the surface. But his attention was no longer on the meeting waiting upstairs. It was on Ella, and on the space between people. Richard Collins noticed the shift. He adjusted his tie, a small movement. Controlled. Sir Richard said again, softer this time. The investors are waiting. Edward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Sarah Bennett as she entered through the side doors. Sharp steps, professional posture, a leather folder already in her hand. She always looked like she expected problems before they arrived. That was why Edward trusted her. "Edward," she said, arriving beside him. "Security said you wanted me here, yes." He nodded toward Ella. "I want everything she said checked." A pause. Sarah followed his gaze, an 8-year-old girl clutching a worn sketchbook. Standing next to a world she didn't belong to. "Understood," Sarah said. No hesitation. That alone made Richard's smile tighten. He didn't like people who didn't hesitate. Ella shifted slightly. Monica stayed close now, both hands on her daughter's shoulders. "We can still leave," Monica whispered. Ella didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the hallway where Jason had disappeared. Because something about it didn't feel finished. Not yet. Sarah stepped closer to Ella. "Can you repeat what you heard?" she asked gently. Ella nodded. But before she could speak, a voice interrupted. "Is this really necessary, Richard?" He stepped forward, hands open in a practiced gesture of reason. "We are in the middle of a critical operational day. A misunderstanding is disrupting executive flow." His tone was calm, almost caring, but his eyes never left Sarah's folder. Edward finally turned fully toward him. "Let her speak." Richard paused, just long enough to feel it. Then he stepped back. Of course, Ella took a breath. The lobby felt too bright now, too loud. Even the piano sounded sharper. "The man in gray," she said quietly. "He was on the phone." Sarah wrote without looking away. "He said tonight. He said the garage. He said after the audit, there can't be mistakes." Every word landed differently now. Not like a child's story, like fragments waiting to connect. Monica looked down at her daughter. Her expression changed slightly. Not belief, not disbelief. Something in between. Fear of being wrong either way. Sarah looked up. "Did you hear any names?" Ella hesitated, then nodded. "Richard." The name didn't echo, it sank. For half a second, nothing happened. Then Richard laughed, light, controlled, almost friendly. "That's absurd." He turned slightly toward Edward. "You don't seriously think—" "I think," Edward interrupted, "we will verify everything." The silence that followed was different from before. This one had weight. Daniel Harris, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably near the desk. He looked toward the hallway again. The same hallway Jason had disappeared into. Then back. Something about Ella's certainty was beginning to bother him. Not because he believed her, but because she hadn't changed her story once. That wasn't typical. Sarah closed her folder. "Edward," she said lower now. "If there is even a possibility this involves internal misconduct, we need to restrict access immediately." Richard immediately stepped in. "That is a serious accusation." "I said possibility," Sarah replied. Edward raised a hand. "Enough." A short silence. Then his phone buzzed. One message from building operations. "Garage camera feed temporarily unstable." Edward stared at the screen. Just a moment, then another message arrived. Maintenance access log shows unscheduled entry request. His eyes shifted slightly. Richard noticed, and for the first time that day his posture changed. Not visibly, but subtly, a tightening in the shoulders, a recalibration. Edward closed his phone. Daniel. Yes, sir. Who accessed the garage today? Daniel checked his tablet quickly. Only authorized staff and maintenance contractors. Names. Daniel scrolled, then hesitated. Jason Reed. The name appeared. Maintenance contractor. Richard's eyes flickered. Just once. But Ella saw it. She didn't know why. She just did. Something about that flicker didn't belong to innocence. Sarah leaned closer to Edward. That's the same name security flagged earlier. Edward nodded slowly, then made a decision. Lock down garage access. Richard's voice sharpened. That will disrupt operations. Do it anyway, Edward said. For the first time, Richard didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward the hallway again, as if calculating distance, time, escape. Ella noticed Jason wasn't in the hallway anymore, but she also noticed something else. A maintenance cart had been left behind. Abandoned, still warm. Daniel walked toward it, slowly, carefully. He bent down, looked underneath, then stopped. What is it? Sarah asked. Daniel didn't answer right away, then he reached inside the cart, pulled out a small device. Not hotel equipment, not maintenance tools, a radio receiver. His face changed. Sir, he said. Edward stepped closer. Richard moved at the same time, but not toward the cart, away from it. Just one step, then another. Ella saw it clearly now. The distance, the separation, the truth forming in silence. And then a sound. A faint notification tone, coming from Richard's pocket. He froze. Just for a second. Too late, Sarah noticed. Daniel noticed. Edward noticed. Even Monica noticed. Richard slowly reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone. He looked at it, and for the first time, the calm disappeared. Not fully, but enough. A message preview lit the screen. Only a few words were visible, but enough to change everything. Garage ready, proceed if confirmed. The lobby didn't move, but everything inside it did. Edward's voice dropped. Richard. Richard didn't answer. His thumb hovered over the screen, just slightly, like he was deciding whether reality could still be edited. Ella stepped forward without realizing it. Don't go there, she said quietly. Richard looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a child, but as a problem. And in that moment, Daniel raised his voice. Sir, we should call the police. That broke it. Richard turned, fast, too fast. I have a meeting, he said sharply, and for the first time he moved toward the exit. Not the elevator, not the meeting room. The exit. Edward stepped into his path. Stop. Richard stopped. The entire lobby held its breath. Piano music continued upstairs, completely unaware. Richard smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. Edward, he said quietly, you're making a mistake. Then he leaned slightly closer. Only Edward could hear the next words. You have no idea what you just interrupted. A pause. Then Richard added, and neither does the girl. Edward didn't move, neither did anyone else, except Ella. She looked at Richard, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of being wrong. She was afraid of being right. Because somewhere below them, in the garage no one wanted to mention, something had already started moving. The words, you have no idea what you just interrupted, didn't fade. They stayed in the air, heavy, like smoke that refused to leave the room. Edward Wood didn't step aside. Neither did Richard Collins. They stood facing each other in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by glass walls, polished stone, and people who suddenly forgot how to breathe normally. Ella stood just behind Edward now, close enough to feel the tension in his posture. Not fear, control, but even control had limits. Sarah Bennett slowly closed her folder. Daniel Harris kept his hand near his radio. Monica pulled Ella slightly backward instinctively. Richard adjusted his cufflinks again. A habit, a signal, something internal trying to stay intact. Edward finally spoke. "Explain." Richard gave a small laugh. Not relaxed, not amused, calculated. "There's nothing to explain," he said. "You're reacting to a child's misunderstanding and a security report that hasn't been verified." Daniel stepped forward. "Sir, we found a device in the maintenance cart." Richard turned his head slightly. "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves someone was listening in restricted areas," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, but sharper now. Richard looked at her. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, then disappeared, like it never happened. Edward studied him, not the words, the behavior, the timing, the distance between reactions. Everything felt slightly off, not loud enough to be obvious, but consistent enough to matter. Ella tugged lightly on Edward's sleeve. "I saw him before," she said quietly. Richard glanced at her, just once. Enough for Ella to notice something cold underneath the expression. He gave the envelope, she continued, to the man in the blue uniform. Jason Reed. The name hung again in the space between them. Richard exhaled slowly. Enough, but it wasn't strong, not anymore. Edward turned slightly towards Daniel. "Lock down all exits." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." As he moved, Richard's phone buzzed again. Once, then twice. He didn't check it immediately. That delay was the first crack. Sarah noticed, so did Edward. So did Ella. Finally, Richard looked down. His expression tightened, just for a moment. Then he pocketed the phone again. Too late. Edward stepped closer. "You're going to stay here," he said. Richard shook his head slightly. "No." A pause. Then softer. "I have investors waiting. I can't be involved in theater because of a child's story." Ella flinched slightly at the word story, but she didn't move away. She stayed exactly where she was. Sarah's voice cut in. "Then you won't mind answering a few questions." Richard turned toward her. "I'll answer them after the meeting. That's not how this works," Sarah said. Silence again, a different kind now. The kind that carries consequences. Edward raised his hand slightly. "Sarah, call the police." That changed everything. Not loudly, but structurally. Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time, his composure slipped just enough to show effort. "Edward," he said slowly, "you're making a decision based on a sound," interrupted him. Footsteps. Fast, from the side corridor. Daniel returned, breathing harder now. "I checked the garage feed again," he said. "Something's wrong." Edward turned. What kind of wrong? Daniel swallowed. "Cameras went offline 2 minutes ago." Silence hit harder this time. Monica pulled Ella closer instinctively. Ella didn't look away from the corridor, because she remembered something. The man in gray, the garage. Tonight, no mistakes. Sarah was already speaking into her phone. "Police are en route. Priority call." Richard stepped back, just half a step. But Edward saw it, the first true retreat, not emotional, strategic. Edward moved slightly to block the main exit. "You're not leaving," he said. Richard smiled again, but it was thinner now. "Edward," he said quietly. "You're overestimating your certainty." Edward didn't respond. Instead, he looked at Sarah. "Pull access logs. Every entry to the garage in the last 24 hours. Sarah nodded. Already moving. Richard exhaled slowly. Then something changed, a shift in him. Not panic, not fear, decision. "I see what this is," he said. Misinterpretation turned into escalation. He adjusted his jacket, then looked around the lobby, at the employees watching, at the guests pretending not to, at Daniel, at Sarah, at Ella, finally at Edward. "You're going to destroy years of structure over this," he said. Edward replied simply, "Structure that hides things isn't structure." That landed differently. Even Richard paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then a faint sound came from the hallway. A metallic click. Everyone turned. Daniel reached for his radio. Security check corridor B. Static. Then nothing. Ella felt it before she saw it. That same cold pressure in her chest. Like the moment before something breaks. Monica whispered Ella, "Stay close." But Ella wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes fixed on the corridor. Because she saw movement, a shadow, then another. Jason Reed. He wasn't supposed to be there, not anymore, but he was, and he was moving fast, toward the side exit. Daniel reacted instantly. "Stop!" He ran. Jason turned sharply. Too fast, too smooth. The kind of movement trained people recognize. Not a maintenance worker's reflex. A prepared one. Edward stepped forward. Security. The lobby erupted. Guests moved back. Employees froze. Sarah kept speaking into her phone. "Now. We need units now." Richard, however, didn't run. He didn't chase. He simply stood still, watching, calculating. And that's when Edward noticed something worse than panic. Confidence returning. Richard was no longer improvising. He was adapting. Jason reached the emergency door, pushed it, locked. He cursed under his breath, turned, and for a brief moment his eyes met Ella's again. She didn't flinch. Daniel closed the distance. "Down," he shouted. Jason moved. Fast. A sudden turn toward the service stairs. Monica gasped. Ella stepped forward without thinking. "Wait." Her voice was small, but in the chaos it carried. Jason hesitated for half a second. That was enough. Daniel tackled him. They hit the ground hard. Metal clattered. Something fell from Jason's pocket. A small recording device. Sarah saw it immediately, secure that Edward didn't move. He was watching Richard now, because Richard hadn't reacted at all. Not to the arrest, not to the noise, not to Jason being caught. Instead, Richard was looking at his phone again, one final time. Then he exhaled. Slow, controlled, like someone closing a file. And in that moment, Edward understood something deeply unsettling. Jason was not the center of this. Richard was. Sarah looked up from the device Jason dropped. Her face changed. "Edward," she said quietly, "we need to see this." Richard finally spoke again, calm, almost soft. "You're already too late." Edward's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Richard looked at him, and this time there was no mask left, only intention. "It means he said the part you think you stopped." He paused, then added, "was never the real plan." A siren echoed faintly outside the building, getting closer. But inside the lobby, the real danger hadn't left yet. It was still standing there, breathing, watching, thinking. And Ella, holding on to Monica's hand tightly now, suddenly realized something she couldn't fully understand. Yet, they had caught one man. But the man in the gray suit was still in control of the room. The sirens grew louder, closer. Blue and red lights flashed briefly through the tall glass windows facing the street. Yet, nobody in the lobby seemed relieved. Not even Edward Wood. Because Richard Collins wasn't acting like a man whose plan had failed. He was acting like a man waiting for everyone else to realize they were looking in the wrong direction. Daniel Harris kept Jason Reed pinned to the floor, while another security officer rushed over with restraints. Jason struggled once, then stopped. His breathing remained surprisingly steady. That bothered Edward. People caught in real panic usually reacted differently. They pleaded. They denied. They ran out of explanations. Jason did none of those things. He simply stared at the ceiling, waiting, as if he already knew what would happen next. Sarah Bennett knelt beside the recording device that had fallen from Jason's pocket. It was small, black, professional-grade equipment, not something a hotel maintenance worker normally carried. She picked it up carefully. "Evidence bag," she called. One of the security officers immediately complied. Richard watched the process, silent, expressionless. The smell of coffee still drifted from the nearby cafe. The piano music had finally stopped. For the first time all afternoon, the hotel felt completely still. Ella stood beside her mother. Monica's hand rested firmly on her shoulder. Protective, constant. But Ella could feel something changing. The adults who had dismissed her earlier were looking at her differently now. Not with belief, not yet, but with uncertainty. And uncertainty was a beginning. Edward approached Sarah. "What did you find?" Sarah stood. "The device appears to be used for remote monitoring." "Monitoring what?" "I won't know until specialists examine it." Richard finally spoke. "There are many legal uses for devices like that." Sarah looked at him. "There are." A pause. "And there are illegal ones." Richard didn't answer. The silence stretched. Then police officers entered through the main doors. Their footsteps echoed across marble floors. Several guests immediately moved aside. The lead detective introduced herself. Detective Laura Martinez, mid-40s, sharp eyes, no wasted movements. She listened quietly while Sarah summarized everything. Ella noticed something important. The detective never once smiled at the story, never rolled her eyes, never treated it like a child's imagination. She simply listened. I felt different, good different. After several minutes, Martinez approached Ella. "You're Ella?" Ella nodded. The detective crouched slightly, not as low as Edward had earlier, but enough. "Can you tell me what happened?" Monica looked uncertain. Ella looked at Edward. Edward gave a small nod. So she told the story again. The hallway, the phone call, the envelope, the man in gray, the man in blue, every detail. Exactly the same way she had told it before. Martinez listened carefully. When Ella finished, the detective stood. Interesting. Just one word. But it made Richard's jaw tighten. Because interesting meant the story wasn't being dismissed, not anymore. Meanwhile, Sarah received a notification on her tablet. She frowned, then checked again. Edward noticed immediately. "What is it?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She scrolled through several screens. Then her expression hardened. "Richard authorized an access request this morning." Richard looked over calmly. "So, the request involved camera permissions." A pause. Sarah turned the tablet toward Edward. "Garage surveillance." The words landed heavily. Daniel looked up. Even Detective Martinez stepped closer. Richard remained calm. "Part of my responsibilities." "Not usually," Sarah replied. Edward studied the data. The request had been made just hours before Ella overheard the conversation. Hours, not weeks, not months, today. Richard folded his arms. "You are building a theory and forcing facts into it." "No," Sarah said. "We're following facts and seeing where they lead." The difference mattered. Everyone in the room felt it. Richard looked away first. Only briefly, but Edward noticed. Years of negotiations had taught him something valuable. The person most desperate to control the narrative often feared the facts. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. His father. standing inside a boardroom decades earlier, the old man's voice sharp and final. Never let doubt slow you down. Back then, Edward had admired that confidence. Years later, he realized something. His father hadn't hated doubt. He had feared it. Because doubt created questions. Questions exposed truths. And truths sometimes hurt powerful people. Edward looked toward Ella. A child had created doubt. Nothing more, nothing less, and now an entire structure was shaking. Across the lobby, Monica sat beside her daughter. The stress of the day showed clearly now. Her shoulders sagged. Her eyes looked tired. She hadn't asked for any of this. She only wanted to deliver pastries, go home, pay bills. Yet, here she was, in the middle of something dangerous. Edward walked over. Monica immediately stood, nervous. "Mr. Wood, you don't need to stand." She stood anyway. Some habits were stronger than comfort. Edward glanced at Ella, then back to Monica. "I appreciate you staying." Monica gave a small smile. We didn't exactly have much choice. For the first time all afternoon, Edward almost smiled. Almost. Then his expression changed, because he noticed something. Ella's sketchbook, still pressed against her chest. "What have you been carrying all day?" he asked. Ella looked down. "My drawings." "Can I see?" She hesitated, then handed it over. Edward opened it. Pages filled with sketches. Buildings, people, streetlights, delivery trucks. Small details most adults ignored. The drawings weren't perfect, but they were observant. Very observant. One page stopped him, a hallway. Service corridor, 2 figures. One in a gray suit, one in a blue uniform, an envelope between them. Edward looked up slowly. "When did you draw this?" Ella shrugged. "After I saw them." Sarah approached. The moment she saw the sketch, she froze. Richard noticed too, and for the first time, all afternoon, real concern appeared. Not fear, concern. The drawing wasn't proof, not legally, but it confirmed something important. Ella wasn't inventing details later. She had noticed them immediately, before anyone questioned her, before anyone influenced her story. Detective Martinez stepped closer. "May I photograph that?" Ella nodded. The detective took several pictures. Richard remained silent, but his eyes followed every movement, every photo, every page, every second. Then another notification arrived on Sarah's tablet. She checked it. Her expression changed again, more serious this time. "Edward?" "What now?" Sarah looked directly at him. "We have a problem." The room quieted. Even the police officers turned. Sarah swallowed once, then spoke. "The garage cameras weren't deleted." A pause. Someone attempted to delete them. Edward stared. "So, where's the footage?" Sarah looked at the screen, then at Richard, and finally back at Edward. "The original files still exist." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because everyone understood exactly what that meant. The truth might still be there, hidden, waiting one click away. Richard slowly uncrossed his arms. The confidence that had carried him through the afternoon seemed slightly weaker now. Not gone, but weaker, and Ella saw it. For the first time since this began, the man in the gray suit looked worried. The lobby suddenly felt smaller. Not physically, emotionally. Every person in the room seemed drawn toward Sarah Bennett's tablet, toward the possibility that the truth still existed, waiting inside a file someone had failed to destroy. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the marble floor. Outside, Chicago traffic moved normally. Inside, nobody felt normal anymore. Edward Wood stood beside Sarah. "What exactly do you mean?" he asked. Sarah looked at the screen again. The deletion request failed. A brief silence followed. Then she continued. The system automatically created a backup before the files were altered. Detective Martinez stepped forward immediately. Can the footage be recovered? Sarah nodded slowly. It appears so. Daniel Harris released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Across the room, Jason Reed remained seated in a chair with his hands restrained behind his back. For the first time, he looked uneasy. Not frightened. Uneasy. Like someone watching a bridge crack beneath him. Edward noticed. So did Martinez. The detective walked toward Jason. You want to tell us what's on those recordings? Jason looked away. No answer. Martinez wasn't surprised. People like him rarely spoke when they still believed someone might protect them. Meanwhile, Sarah connected her tablet to a larger display screen used for business presentations. Employees quietly moved aside. Guests who had planned to leave remained where they were. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Richard Collins stood near a marble pillar. Still composed, still dressed like a man attending a board meeting. But there was a new tension around his eyes. Small, yet impossible to miss once seen. Ella noticed it. She had spent all day watching people, watching expressions, watching tiny details. That was what drawing taught her. People revealed themselves in moments, not speeches, moments. The screen flickered. Loading. Recovering files. A progress bar appeared. The room waited. 92%, 93, 94. No one spoke. The faint hum of the building's ventilation system became strangely loud. Finally, the footage appeared. Black and white, time-stamped, garage level 3. The image showed rows of parked vehicles. Concrete pillars. Dim overhead lighting. Nothing unusual at first. Then movement. A man entered from the far side of the frame. Blue maintenance uniform. Jason Reed. A murmur spread across the room. Jason lowered his head. The footage continued. Several minutes later, another figure entered. Richard Collins. No phone, no assistants, no witnesses. Just Richard. The lobby fell completely silent. Everyone watched. Richard and Jason stopped beside a support column. There was no audio, only images. But sometimes images were enough. Richard removed an envelope from his jacket. Jason accepted it, exactly as Ella had described. Exactly. Monica slowly looked at her daughter. Ella stared at the screen. She didn't feel proud. She felt cold. Because being right suddenly felt heavier than she expected. Edward never took his eyes off the footage. Neither did Sarah. The video continued. Richard pointed toward an area beyond the camera's view. Jason nodded. Then both men left separately. The recording ended. Nobody moved. For a long moment, nobody even seemed to breathe. Then Richard spoke, calmly, too calmly. That's not evidence of a murder plot. The spell broke. People shifted. Whispers returned. Sarah crossed her arms. Then explained the envelope. Payment. For what? A contractor. Sarah's expression didn't change. Then, why delete the footage? Richard looked directly at her. I didn't. The answer came quickly. Prepared, almost rehearsed, Detective Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Collins, several pieces of evidence currently place you at the center of this investigation. Richard shrugged slightly. Investigation isn't guilt. No one argued. Because technically he was right. Not yet. Not enough. Edward knew it. Sarah knew it. Martinez certainly knew it. The video proved secrecy, not motive, not intent, not murder, at least not yet. Richard seemed to understand that too. His confidence began returning, little by little. Then Ella spoke. A small voice, almost lost among the adults. That's not everything. Everyone turned. Monica looked surprised. Ella? Ella stared at the screen, then at Jason, then back again. The phone. Sarah frowned. What phone? Ella stepped closer. The phone call. Silence. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Ella pointed toward her mother's purse. My mom's old phone. Monica blinked. What about it? You said I could borrow it while you worked. Monica nodded slowly. To draw building lights. I used the camera. Sarah leaned forward. And Ella swallowed. I think it was recording when I heard them. The room froze. Richard didn't move, not even an inch. That worried Edward more than any reaction would have, because Richard looked like a man calculating odds. Nothing more, nothing less. Monica quickly opened her purse. The old phone was still there, scratched, cheap, the battery nearly dead. Ella had used it countless times. Nobody thought much about it. Until now. Sarah carefully accepted the device. Do you remember recording something? Ella shook her head. No. You just turned the camera on? Yes. The phone screen illuminated weakly. Sarah navigated through the files. Several short videos appeared. Mostly lights, walls, random sketches, then one recording. 3 minutes long. Time-stamped just before Ella ran into the lobby. The room grew silent again. Even Richard watched now. The video played. The image itself was useless. Mostly darkness, part of a wall, a corner of the floor. But the audio mattered. At first, there was only background noise, kitchen sounds, cartwheels, distant voices. Then a voice appeared, Richard's, no mistake, everyone recognized it instantly. The recording quality wasn't perfect, yet several phrases were unmistakable. Tonight, static, garage, more static. Before the audit, a pause, then another voice. Jason's. Lower, harder to hear, then Richard again. The rest, after it's done. The recording ended. Nobody spoke, not immediately, because the words settled slowly, like stones sinking through water. Edward looked toward Richard. The confidence was still there, but thinner now. Detective Martinez exchanged a glance with another officer. Sarah quietly saved copies of the recording. Daniel looked down at the floor. Embarrassment crept across him. He remembered dismissing Ella, remembered assuming she was confused. Now, he wasn't sure what to say. Across the room, Walter Jenkins emerged from the crowd. The elderly chef had been watching for hours. Silent, nervous, invisible, until now. I need to say something. His voice shook slightly. Everyone turned. Walter cleared his throat. I saw Jason in a restricted area this morning. No one interrupted. I thought it was strange. A pause. But I didn't report it. Martinez stepped closer. Why not? Walter stared at the floor. The answer took a moment, then came quietly. Because people like me don't usually get listened to. The words landed heavily. Ella looked at him. Walter looked back. And for a second, neither needed to explain anything. They understood. Different ages. Same experience. The room remained silent. Then Richard laughed, a short sound, sharp, unexpected. Everyone looked at him. Richard shook his head. This is unbelievable. No one responded. He continued, an old man, a little girl, a blurry recording. Then he said something that changed everything. Something he didn't realize was a mistake. No child could possibly know about the payment details. The moment the words left his mouth, Sarah's eyes widened. Daniel looked up. Martinez froze. Even Edward blinked. Because Ella had never mentioned payment details. Not once. The room became completely still. Richard realized it a second too late, and for the first time all day, the man who controlled every conversation had accidentally revealed he knew something he shouldn't have known. The silence hit harder than any accusation. Richard Collins knew it the moment the words left his mouth. No child could possibly know about the payment details. He heard it. Everyone else heard it too, and the problem was simple. Ella had never mentioned payment details. Not once. Not to Edward, not to Sarah, not to Detective Martinez, not to anyone. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The giant lobby seemed frozen beneath the warm chandelier light. The smell of coffee drifted from a nearby cafe. Ice clinked against glass somewhere in the restaurant. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary afternoon. Yet everything had changed. Sarah Bennett was the first to speak. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. Interesting choice of words. Richard looked at her. I misspoke. Did you... A pause. Richard folded his arms. The confidence returned to his posture. Or at least he tried to make it return. Everyone has been talking about payments for the last hour. No, Sarah replied. We've been talking about an envelope. Silence again. The distinction mattered. Everyone knew it. Richard knew it most of all. Edward watched carefully. Years of business had taught him that people rarely exposed themselves when pressured. They exposed themselves when they felt safe, when they believed they were still in control. That was exactly what had happened. Richard had spent the entire day directing conversations, redirecting questions, minimizing concerns. Then, for one careless second, he revealed knowledge nobody should have had. Detective Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Collins, I'd advise you to stop making statements until legal counsel is present. Richard smiled, a tired smile this time. I've done nothing wrong. Nobody responded. The detective didn't argue. She simply wrote something in her notebook. Across the room, Jason Reed shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time all day, his composure seemed weaker than Richard's. The crack had started. Ella noticed. Children often notice things adults overlooked. Jason wasn't looking at Richard anymore. He was avoiding him. Looking at the floor. Looking toward the exit. Looking anywhere except the man who had hired him. Sarah noticed too. She walked toward Jason. Slowly. Deliberately. Jason. No response. She tried again. Richard just made your situation much worse. Jason remained silent. The detective joined her. So did you. Still nothing. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead. A police officer stood nearby watching. Waiting. Everyone seemed to be waiting. Waiting for someone to speak. Waiting for the truth to stop hiding. Then Walter Jenkins cleared his throat. The elderly chef stood near the back of the crowd. His white chef's jacket was stained from a long day of work. His shoulders looked tired. His hands looked older than the rest of him. But something had changed inside him. The fear was still there, just smaller. I remembered something. Everyone turned. Walter swallowed, then continued, This morning. A pause. I saw Richard and Jason near the freight elevator. Richard immediately shook his head. That's meaningless. Walter ignored him. The old chef kept talking. I wasn't supposed to hear them. His fingers trembled slightly. But I did. Sarah stepped closer. What did you hear? Walter closed his eyes briefly, trying to remember, trying to be certain. Then he spoke. Jason asked if everything was ready. Silence. Walter continued. And Richard said, the old man's voice lowered. After tonight, none of this will matter. The room remained still. Richard laughed again, but it sounded different now, forced, thin. You expect people to believe that. Walter looked directly at him. For the first time all afternoon. I don't know, a pause, but I know what I heard. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. Edward felt something shift inside the room. The people watching were changing. Earlier they had been spectators. Now they were witnesses. A dangerous difference. Because witnesses started remembering things, and once people began speaking, silence became difficult to maintain. Daniel Harris suddenly looked up. His expression changed, as if a forgotten memory had returned. "Wait." Everyone turned. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "This morning." Sarah immediately focused on him. "What about this morning?" Daniel looked toward Richard, then away, then back again. "There was a service request." His voice sounded uncertain. "I'm just remembering it now." "What kind of request?" Daniel frowned. "The garage." Edward's eyes narrowed. Daniel continued. "Richard personally approved emergency maintenance access." Richard immediately answered. "Because there was a reported electrical issue." Daniel shook his head slowly. "That's what I thought." A pause. Then, "But building maintenance never filed a report." The lobby became quiet once more. Another piece, another crack, another inconsistency. Richard's jaw tightened. Very slightly. The detective wrote more notes. Sarah typed something into her tablet. Edward remained silent, listening, watching, calculating. For years, Richard had managed financial operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had built a reputation on precision. Precision was difficult to fake. So were mistakes. Yet today, mistakes were appearing everywhere, small ones, human ones, the kind liars made when reality stopped cooperating. Meanwhile, Ella sat beside her mother. The excitement was gone. Now she simply felt tired. Very tired. Monica brushed a hand gently across her daughter's hair. "You okay?" Ella nodded, then looked toward Richard. "Mom, what is it?" "He looks different now." Monica followed her gaze. Richard stood near a marble column, still dressed perfectly, still standing straight. Yet Ella was right. He did look different, because the mask was slipping. Not completely. Just enough. A man who believed he controlled the room had discovered he no longer did. Across the lobby, Sarah suddenly received another notification. She stopped typing. Read it. Then read it again. Edward noticed immediately. "What happened?" Sarah looked up. Her expression had changed completely. Not surprise, not concern, something closer to certainty. "We recovered financial records." The room froze. Richard didn't move, not even a fraction. Sarah continued. "The company that received multiple payments from Richard's authorized accounts," she looked directly at him, "isn't a maintenance contractor." No one spoke. The air felt heavy, thick. "What is it?" Edward asked. Sarah turned the tablet. A name appeared on the screen. A shell company, registered less than 8 months earlier. No real employees, no physical office, only transfers. Money in, money out, thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. The detective stepped closer. "Who owns it?" Sarah tapped once more. Another page appeared. Another document. Another connection. Then she answered. "The ownership trail leads to a trust." A pause. "And that trust is connected to Richard Collins." The words echoed through the lobby. Richard finally looked away. Just for a second. That was enough. Edward saw it, Sarah saw it, Martinez saw it, even Ella saw it. Because innocent people usually looked at evidence. Guilty people looked for exits. Outside, police lights flashed across the hotel windows. Inside, the truth continued closing in. Richard exhaled slowly. The confidence that had protected him all day seemed weaker now. Not gone, but weakening, piece by piece. Then Detective Martinez's phone rang. She answered, listened, her expression sharpened instantly. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Martinez lowered the phone. "We just received another report." The room waited. The detective looked directly at Edward, then at Richard, and finally said, "We found a second location connected to Jason Reed." A pause. "And there's something inside that may explain what the real plan was." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because suddenly, everyone understood. The garage had never been the entire story. It had only been the beginning. The lobby remained silent after Detective Martinez spoke. A second location. Something connected to Jason Reed. Something important enough to change the entire investigation. The late afternoon sun had faded now. Outside the massive glass windows, Chicago's skyline glowed beneath the first hints of evening. Streetlights flickered on. Inside Wood Grand Hotel, nobody seemed aware of the passing time. Everyone was focused on the same thing: the truth. Edward Wood looked at Martinez. What did they find? The detective glanced at her phone again, carefully, as if choosing the right words mattered. "It appears to be a rented storage unit." Nobody moved. Richard Collins stared straight ahead. His face remained controlled, but his eyes no longer carried the confidence they had earlier. The foundation beneath him was weakening. Piece by piece, Martinez continued. Officers searched the location after finding records connected to Jason Reed. Sarah Bennett stepped closer. And the detective took a breath. There were documents. A pause. Electronic equipment. Another pause. And detailed surveillance records. The room seemed to tighten. Edward felt his pulse slow. That always happened when things became serious. While other people grew emotional, he became calmer, more focused. "What kind of surveillance?" Martinez looked directly at him. "You?" Silence, real silence, not uncertainty, not anticipation, shock. Even the employees standing nearby seemed frozen. The detective continued. "There were photographs." She looked down at her phone. "Your home?" Another pause. "Your office?" Another. "Your daily schedule?" Edward said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Across the room, Monica instinctively pulled Ella closer. The little girl looked confused. She understood enough to know it was bad, not enough to understand how bad. Sarah spoke quietly. "That isn't random." "No," Martinez agreed. "It isn't." The detective stepped toward Edward. "There were also route maps." Edward's eyes narrowed. "What kind of route maps?" "Your usual travel routes." The answer landed heavily, because now the pieces fit together. The garage, the surveillance, the secret payments, the deleted footage, the storage unit. One by one they connected. Not perfectly, but enough. Richard finally spoke. His voice remained calm, remarkably calm. "You still don't have proof." The statement irritated several people instantly, not because it was wrong, because technically it wasn't. Sarah folded her arms. "We have surveillance records. We have financial records. We have unauthorized access logs. We have witness testimony." Richard shrugged. "And none of it proves intent?" The room fell quiet again, because once again Richard wasn't entirely wrong. Not legally, not yet. Detective Martinez looked toward one of the officers standing nearby. The officer handed her a tablet. She tapped the screen, opened a file, then looked directly at Richard. "We also found this." The screen turned toward the room. A scanned document appeared, several pages, typed, detailed, specific. Edward immediately recognized the contents. His weekly schedule, not a public version, not something available online. A private executive schedule, restricted access. The document included times, locations, vehicles, driver assignments, security arrangements. The kind of information only a handful of trusted people could access. A handful that included Richard Collins. Nobody spoke. Martinez zoomed in. Highlighted one section. Friday, today, garage level 3. 6:40 p.m. The exact location Ella had overheard mentioned. The exact location Jason had been preparing. The exact location Richard had tried to explain away. Even Richard looked briefly uncomfortable. Just briefly. But it was there. Sarah noticed immediately. So now we know why the garage mattered. Richard remained silent. For once. That alone spoke loudly. Across the lobby, Daniel Harris slowly sat down. The realization was hitting him hard. Hours earlier, he had dismissed Ella as a confused child. Now, federal-level evidence was beginning to confirm her story. The thought made him feel sick. Walter Jenkins looked equally disturbed. Several employees whispered quietly among themselves. Not about Ella anymore, about Richard, because people were beginning to remember things. Small moments, odd instructions, strange requests, details that once seemed harmless. Now they looked different. The detective continued reviewing files. Then another document appeared. This one changed everything. Martinez stared at it for several seconds, then looked toward Sarah. Sarah stepped closer, read it. Her expression hardened immediately. "What is it?" Edward asked. Neither woman answered right away. That worried him. Finally, Sarah looked up. "There are payment records." Edward nodded. "We already know that." "No," Sarah's voice lowered. "Not those payments." The room grew quiet again. Sarah turned the tablet. Bank transfers filled the screen. Large amounts, multiple transactions, hidden through layers of accounts, yet the destination remained visible. Jason Reed, several payments, several dates, several months. The evidence sat there, cold, simple, clear. Detective Martinez looked at Richard. "Would you like to explain these?" Richard didn't answer. Not immediately. His eyes moved across the screen, then towards Jason. For the first time all day, the two men made direct eye contact, and something changed. Jason looked away first. Fear, real fear, the kind that appeared when loyalty ended. Richard understood it immediately. Edward understood it too. The partnership was breaking. Sarah stepped closer to Jason. "You're not protecting him anymore." Jason remained silent. "You know that, right?" "Nothing." The detective crouched beside him. Calm. Patient. "He has lawyers." Jason looked down. "He has money." Silence. "He has options." Another pause. Then Martinez delivered the final sentence. "You don't." The words landed. Jason's shoulders sagged slightly. Tiny movement, huge meaning. Richard saw it. His face tightened. For the first time all day, concern became visible, not for himself, for what Jason might say. The detective waited. The room waited. Even Ella waited. The sounds of the hotel seemed very far away now. Finally, Jason spoke, barely above a whisper. "I wasn't supposed to kill him." The words hit the room like lightning. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Even Richard froze. Jason continued, his voice shaky now, unsteady. "I swear." Martinez remained calm. "What were you supposed to do?" Jason looked at the floor, then at Edward, then away again. "Make it look like an accident." The silence that followed felt endless. Edward stared at him. Not angry, not yet, just listening. Jason swallowed. "The garage cameras." A pause. "The vehicle." Another pause. "The route." He lowered his head. "I was supposed to create an accident." Nobody spoke, because everyone understood what that meant. Not a spontaneous act, not an impulsive crime, a planned operation. Months of preparation. Carefully organized. Richard finally spoke again, sharp this time. "Don't say another word." Every head turned. Jason looked at him. Then something surprising happened. He laughed, a short, bitter laugh. the sound of a man realizing he had been abandoned. "You think I'm still protecting you?" Richard's face darkened. Jason shook his head. "No." He looked toward Martinez, then Sarah, then Edward. Finally, he pointed, straight at Richard Collins. "He paid for everything." The lobby erupted, gasps, whispers, shock. Monica covered her mouth. Walter sat heavily in a nearby chair. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Richard immediately stepped forward. "He's lying." But the words sounded weaker now. Much weaker. Because they weren't alone anymore. The payments, the surveillance, the schedule, the footage, the recordings, the witnesses, the storage unit. The evidence was beginning to form a complete picture, and everyone could see it. Richard looked around the room, at the employees, at the police, at Sarah, at Edward, at Ella. Especially Ella. The little girl who should have remained invisible. The little girl nobody believed. The little girl who had noticed the one thing everyone else missed. Then Richard spoke quietly, almost coldly. "You should have stayed quiet." The words weren't directed at Edward, or Sarah, or the police. They were directed at Ella. The room instantly stiffened. Edward stepped between them. Without hesitation, without thinking. Ella felt Monica's hand tighten around hers. The detective moved closer. Officers adjusted their positions. And for the first time all day, Richard Collins truly looked cornered. "You should have stayed quiet." The words hung in the air, cold, sharp, ugly. For a moment nobody moved. The grand lobby of the Wood Grand Hotel seemed frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Outside, evening had settled over Chicago. Rain had begun tapping softly against the glass walls. Inside, the truth stood exposed. Edward Wood stepped forward immediately. Just one step, but it placed him directly between Richard Collins and Ella Brooks. The movement was instinctive, not planned, not calculated. Protective. Ella felt it. Monica felt it too. Richard looked at Edward, then at the police officers surrounding the room, then back at Ella. The confidence that had carried him through most of the day was gone now. Not completely, but enough for everyone to see. Detective Martinez broke the silence. "Richard Collins." Her voice was calm and firm. "Based on the evidence currently available, you are being detained pending further investigation." Richard laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Investigation." No one responded. The detective nodded toward the officers. Two stepped forward. Richard didn't resist, not physically, but his eyes never stopped moving, looking, calculating, searching for something that no longer existed. Control. As the officers secured his hands, dozens of emotions moved through the room. Relief, shock, anger, disbelief. For some employees, Richard had been their boss for years. For others, he had been a mentor. For everyone, he had been powerful. And now, he was leaving in handcuffs. Reality felt strange. Walter Jenkins sat quietly in a chair near the wall. His weathered hands rested on his knees. He stared at the floor, thinking about every moment he had stayed silent. Every moment he had convinced himself it wasn't his place to speak. Daniel Harris looked equally troubled. He remembered dismissing Ella, remembered telling himself children misunderstood things, remembered wanting the easy answer. Now, the easy answer sat in handcuffs, and the truth had come from an 8-year-old girl. As officers escorted Richard towards the exit, he stopped. Only briefly. He looked over his shoulder at Edward. At Sarah, then at Ella. Nobody spoke. Finally, he was led away. The lobby doors opened. Rainy evening air drifted inside. Then the doors closed again, and Richard Collins was gone. The silence afterward felt completely different. Lighter, not happy, just lighter, like a storm had finally moved past. Edward stood still for several seconds, watching the doors, watching the reflection of police lights disappear into the night. Then he turned around. His eyes found Ella immediately. The little girl looked exhausted. Her sketchbook hung loosely at her side. Her hair was slightly messy. Her shoulders looked heavy. She didn't look victorious. She looked like a child who had survived a very long day. Edward walked toward her. The room quietly watched. Monica straightened slightly, protective, cautious. Edward stopped in front of them. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, "I owe you an apology." The lobby became silent again. Not because anyone was surprised, because nobody expected those words from a man like Edward Wood. Ella blinked. "So, does this hotel?" Monica looked genuinely startled. Edward continued, "You tried to tell us the truth." He glanced around the room, and most of us chose the easier explanation. Nobody argued, because it was true. Daniel lowered his eyes. Walter nodded slowly. Several employees looked uncomfortable, as they should. Ella shifted her weight. "You listened." Edward almost smiled. "Eventually." The honesty of the answer made Monica laugh softly despite everything. The first real laugh anyone had heard all afternoon. Sarah approached, her tablet still under one arm. "We've confirmed additional financial transfers." Edward nodded. The investigation would continue. There would be court hearings, audits, reports, lawyers, months of work. Justice in the real world rarely happened in a single day, but tonight had changed the direction of everything. That mattered. Edward looked back toward Monica. "How long have you been supplying pastries to the hotel?" Monica hesitated. "About 2 years." "And you're still working from a shared kitchen?" She looked surprised. "Yes." Edward nodded thoughtfully. He remembered the delivery entrance, the old van, the careful way she handled every invoice. People who worked that hard deserved respect, not pity, respect. "Sarah?" "Yes." "I'd like our procurement department to review Monica's company for a formal vendor partnership." Monica blinked. "What?" Edward raised a hand gently. "I'm not offering charity. The distinction mattered. Everyone could hear it. I'm offering the opportunity to compete for a long-term contract through the proper process." Monica looked stunned. "Mr. Wood, you earned the chance." A long silence followed. Then Monica nodded, slowly. Emotion filled her eyes, but she said nothing. Sometimes gratitude didn't need words. Edward crouched slightly so he could speak to Ella again. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Ella looked down at her sketchbook, then back at him. "I don't know." "That's a good answer." She smiled, a small smile, the first one all day. Edward noticed several drawings sticking out from the sketchbook. Buildings, people, street scenes, observations, details, the work of someone who paid attention. A rare skill. "You like drawing?" Ella nodded. "Very much." Edward stood, then looked toward Sarah. "I want information about our education foundation." Sarah already understood. "There are scholarship programs available." "Good." Edward looked back at Monica. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd like someone from the foundation to speak with you." Monica looked overwhelmed. "Why?" Edward glanced at Ella. "Because talent should have opportunities." Simple, direct, reasonable. Not a miracle, not a gift dropped from the sky. An opportunity, the kind created through systems that already existed, that mattered. Across the room, several employees watched quietly. Many of them had spent years feeling invisible. Tonight had shown them something important. Being invisible didn't mean being powerless. Sarah cleared her throat. There is one more thing. Edward turned. What is it? The internal review. He nodded. Sarah continued. We discovered several complaints from lower-level employees that were ignored over the last few years. The room became quiet again. Edward wasn't surprised, but he wasn't proud either. Richard hadn't built his influence alone. Systems had allowed it. Systems that needed to change. Edward looked around the lobby, at the delivery workers, the kitchen staff, the security officers, the people usually overlooked. Then he made another decision. We're creating a confidential reporting program. Several people exchanged glances. Edward continued. Anyone can report concerns. A pause. Without fear of retaliation, Walter slowly straightened in his chair. Daniel looked relieved. Others simply listened. The announcement wasn't dramatic, but it mattered, because real change often looked ordinary at first. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, the lobby finally felt calm, for the first time since Ella had grabbed Edward's sleeve. Edward looked at the little girl one last time, then extended his hand. Would you do me a favor? Ella looked curious. What? A faint smile touched his face. Next time you visit this hotel, he glanced toward the grand entrance, the revolving doors, the marble staircase, the place reserved for guests and executives. Don't come through the delivery entrance. Ella frowned slightly. Why? Edward looked around the lobby, at everyone watching, then answered, because people who tell the truth shouldn't have to enter through the back door. Ella stared at him, then slowly smiled, and for the first time all day the entire room felt warm again. 6 months later, Chicago looked different. Not because the city had changed, because the people inside the story had. A cool autumn breeze moved through the streets of the South Side. Golden leaves drifted across sidewalks. Morning sunlight reflected from shop windows. And for the first time in years, Monica Brooks unlocked the door to a business that belonged entirely to her. A small sign hung above the entrance. Brooks Family Bakery. The name wasn't flashy, it wasn't famous, but it was hers. Monica stood in the doorway for a moment before turning the key. The scent of cinnamon vanilla and fresh bread immediately filled the air. She smiled. Every morning, she still arrived before sunrise. She still mixed dough by hand. She still worried about inventory and payroll. Success hadn't made life perfect. It had simply made life possible. The long-term contract with Wood Grand Hotel had provided stability, not riches, not miracles. Stability, the kind that allowed planning, the kind that allowed hope. Inside the bakery, a familiar voice called out, "Mom, you're daydreaming again." Monica laughed. Ella sat near the front window with the sketchbook spread across the table. Some things never changed. She was taller now. Not much, just enough for her mother to notice. Her drawings had changed too, more detailed, more confident. The scholarship program funded by the Wood Foundation had opened new opportunities. Art classes, workshops, museum visits, experiences Monica never could have afforded alone. Yet, Ella remained the same person, curious, observant, quiet. The attention from the investigation had faded. Thankfully, because Ella never wanted to be famous. She only wanted to be heard. Across town, Edward Wood sat in a conference room overlooking the Chicago River. The skyline stretched beyond the glass walls, bright, endless, beautiful. A stack of reports sat on the table before him. Internal reforms, ethics reviews, employee feedback programs. The consequences of everything that had happened 6 months earlier. The company looked different now. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. The anonymous reporting system Sarah Bennett helped create had already uncovered several smaller issues before they became larger ones. Employees who once remained silent now had a voice. Managers listened more carefully, Security procedures had improved. Transparency had improved. Trust had improved. Edward stared out the window. A memory surfaced. The hotel lobby. A frightened little girl. A simple warning. Please don't go to the parking garage tonight. He wondered sometimes what would have happened if he had ignored her. The thought never stayed long, because he already knew the answer. Someone would have paid the price. Possibly him, maybe others too. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Bennett entered carrying another file. Good news. Edward raised an eyebrow. That's rare, coming from a lawyer. Sarah smiled slightly. The final criminal case is moving forward. Edward nodded. Richard Collins had eventually been charged with multiple crimes: financial fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The investigation uncovered years of hidden corruption. The legal process had taken months, as legal processes often do, but evidence mattered. Facts mattered. And facts had continued piling up. What about Jason Reed? Edward asked. Sarah sat down. He accepted a plea agreement. Edward wasn't surprised. Jason had eventually cooperated. His testimony helped investigators uncover the full scope of the scheme. Not because he became a hero, because reality finally caught him. That was different. Edward looked back toward the river. Justice wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was paperwork, interviews, court dates, patience, months of patient work. That truth mattered too. Later that week, Wood Grand Hotel hosted a community appreciation event. Nothing extravagant, just families, employees, local businesses, community partners. The ballroom glowed beneath warm lights. Children ran between tables. Laughter filled the air. Fresh food aromas drifted through the room. For once, the hotel felt less like a corporation and more like a gathering place. Ella arrived holding her mother's hand. Monica wore her best dress. Ella carried something wrapped in brown paper, a gift. As they entered through the front doors, several employees recognized them. Not because of headlines, because they remembered. Daniel Harris approached first. His smile was genuine. Good to see you both. Monica smiled back. You too. Daniel crouched slightly toward Ella. I still owe you an apology. Ella looked embarrassed. You already said sorry. I know. Daniel smiled. But I wanted to say it again. Ella nodded, then offered the wisdom only children sometimes manage. It's okay. A pause. You listened later. Daniel laughed softly. Fair enough. Across the room, Walter Jenkins wawed enthusiastically from a dessert table. Retirement suited him. He looked happier, lighter. When he reached Ella, he handed her a cookie. On the house. She grinned. It's always on the house. That's because you're special. Ella thought about that, then shook her head. No. Walter looked confused. Ella smiled. I'm just me. The old chef laughed. That answer felt exactly right. A few minutes later, Edward arrived. Conversations quieted briefly. Not because of fear anymore, respect, a healthier thing. Edward greeted employees, shook hands, stopped to talk. The changes in him weren't dramatic, but they were real. Eventually, he reached Ella and Monica. I'm glad you came, Monica smiled. We wouldn't miss it. Edward noticed the package in Ella's hands. What's that? Ella held it out. For you. Edward carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a framed drawing. For several seconds, he simply stared. The ballroom noise faded into the background. The drawing showed two figures, a child and an adult. The child stood below. The adult knelt down to listen. No luxury cars, no skyscrapers, no money, no titles. Just listening. The message couldn't have been clearer. Edward swallowed. Unexpected emotion tightened his chest. "When did you draw this?" Ella shrugged. "Last week. It's beautiful." She smiled, then pointed at the picture. "My teacher says good listeners are brave." Edward looked at the drawing again. Maybe she was right. Listening required admitting you might not know everything. That took courage. More courage than many powerful people possessed. The ballroom lights reflected softly across the glass frame. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Edward asked, "What made you draw this?" Ella thought carefully. The answer mattered. Finally she said, "Because everybody thinks the important part was me talking." A pause. "It wasn't." Edward looked at her. "What was it?" Ella's answer came simply. "You listened." Silence followed. Warm silence. Honest silence, the kind that stays with people. Outside evening settled over Chicago. Inside, the celebration continued. Families laughed, employees talked. Music played softly, life moved forward, as it always does. Yet something important remained behind, a lesson, a reminder. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the biggest truth. And sometimes real courage isn't speaking, it's listening. The night ended with people returning to their ordinary lives. Monica locked her bakery the next morning. Edward returned to work. Sarah returned to legal battles. Daniel returned to security. Walter returned to enjoying retirement. And Ella returned to school with a sketchbook under her arm. Exactly where she belonged, because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry pencils. This story reminds us of something many people forget. As they grow older, truth does not depend on status. The person with the most money is not always right. The person with the loudest voice is not always honest. And sometimes the individual everyone overlooks is the one who sees reality most clearly. Ella was not powerful. She had no title, no influence, and no special authority. What she had was the courage to speak when something felt wrong. Just as importantly, she continued telling the truth even when adults doubted her. But this story is not only about Ella. It is also about Edward. His greatest decision was not building a business empire. It was choosing to listen. Many tragedies happen because people dismiss warnings from those they consider unimportant. Real leadership requires humility. It requires the willingness to hear voices that others ignore. In everyday life, we may never face a situation this dramatic, but we all encounter moments when someone needs to be heard. A child, a coworker, a neighbor, a friend. Take a moment to listen. You never know when a small voice may be carrying an important truth. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments what lesson meant the most to you. And if you believe kindness, honesty, and courage still matter in today's world, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more inspiring stories. This is a work of fiction created for storytelling and entertainment purposes.